Hey there. So it's time for another TIPspiration. And I have been working with a family, and their child is currently on a 504 plan and looking to go to possibly getting IEP services or special ed services with an IEP. So we're going to talk today about moving from a 504 plan to assessment for special education and the eligibility meeting and such. So what was interesting at this 504 meeting that I was at the other day was, one, all the teachers were there, which I was impressed with, right? Because a lot of times we, will see one or two general ed teachers, and especially for a secondary student, we won't see all the teachers, but all of the students' teachers were there. So that was terrific because they could all give a synopsis of what's been happening in their class and, any kinds of struggles that the student has had, also some success stories. So with that information, we were able to do some tweaking on the accommodation list, but we knew really our main goal, and the school knew that too, our main goal was to talk about a consent for assessment for special education services, and we wanted time in the meeting to go over that. So it took a while, probably about an hour, for all the teachers to go through their information. It became quite obvious that the teachers are labeling his sensory kinds of regulation behaviors as being silly, as, he could choose not to do that, things like that. So my ears always perk up, and I always feel like that's a red flag when teachers are talking about a child's willful behavior, like he is choosing to not follow their directions or choosing to be, concerned about the amount of noise in the different classes. So I quickly jotted down some notes as far as that's one thing that we want the teachers to understand, have a better understanding as far as his sensory needs, and strategies that they can use at school. The other thing that was interesting when we were talking about this is his mom was saying, if they kind of used the numbers 1 through 5 to help him at home know like that he's starting to escalate with his sensory needs and what can he do about that. And so she gave an example to the teacher. She said, if you see his eyes fluttering, that's when he's pretty much at number 3. And I was saying, that kind of information is so helpful for teachers to have. So I asked the mom if she could make a list of observable behaviors that teachers can look for when he's starting to become dysregulated. Of course, we also want the teachers to do prevention kinds of strategies, right? So he has those sensory breaks before he starts getting dysregulated. But those kinds of gems of information that parents have, that you have about your child, are so important for you to share with the staff, so they don't have to spend months trying to figure these kinds of things out. And then it was interesting because even more recently, I was talking to another mother about her daughter, and she is like really into music and knows all these different songs. And it's just like, kind of one of her fascinations that she really loves. And we were talking again about sensory signals. The school is wanting the student to identify when she is feeling dysregulated. And we know, even as adults, that can be hard for us, right? So if you can personalize those kind of, I don't know, for this case, at this student school, they were using different color cards to donate or to denote if she was becoming more escalated. And it didn't seem like it was really working that well as a system. So I had suggested, since she was so into music and songs, maybe her daughter could pick a song that represents like everything is cool, right? Everything is fine and dandy. And for her to think about, like, am I in that state? Like, am I feeling that, like, relaxed and calm? And then to go to like maybe a level 1, which would be a different song title of, I'm starting to feel kind of worried or kind of nervous about something. So instead of using some of the traditional language that they do with like, how's your engine running and different things like this, is to suggest to the staff that they personalize that and make it something that can be more meaningful for your child. So I see we have some live viewers who say hi so I can see who you are and welcome you. Type in any comments or questions you have. And if you're watching the replay, please do the same. But so looking back of, taking a student from a 504 plan to an IEP, usually this comes about when you are noticing that the accommodations in the 504 plan aren't kind of cutting it with the student, and the student still isn't being very successful. I think you always first want to look at the accommodations, make sure that all the teachers understand them, because it's like amazing how many times, even if the teachers get a copy of the 504 plan, that they really don't understand what those general statements are under the accommodation section. So after you've done that, and it still doesn't seem like things are working well, a parent can request for special education testing. Now, this mother had done this earlier in the year, and the school was saying no, that looking at previous testing that had been done, they didn't think that the student would qualify for special ed. But things kept kind of, escalating as far as things not going well at school. So we had called this meeting to look at, consent for assessment. So finally, after about an hour of the other teachers reporting, we got to, we need to talk about the consent for assessment. And so they printed one off. We went through some previous testing that had been done last year that we already had some pretty accurate results from. So we didn't want to repeat that, but there were some additional testing that we wanted to have occur. And what was so interesting is the school psychologist printed off the consent form, but before she would talk about it really, she was saying to the mom, she said, well, with special education services, your son will be pulled out. And I know in the past you've talked about how you don't want your son pulled out. And one, I thought it was kind of strange. So shall I get my red flag out again? It was a red flag that she was already talking about pullout services before we had even signed the consent for assessment. So there was this predetermined route of if he does qualify for special ed, he'll have to be pulled out. And so I said, well, we know special ed services are portable and they can actually be brought to the student. And so we don't have to assume that he has to be pulled out. And the school psychologist was like, well, yeah, And I said, and secondly, I said, don't we want to first figure out the consent for which assessments, have those done, and then have the eligibility meeting before we even start talking about what special ed services would look like? It was like I guess I've never had, so let me know in the comments if you've had your child on a 504 before and then you wanted to switch and have him start getting services under special education in an IEP. So let me know if that's happened to you. But yeah, that they would make, and it was almost kind of like, I felt like the school psychologist was trying to talk the mother out of signing for consent for assessment, because it's like, oh, if you do that, your kid's going to be pulled out. And it's like, no, that's not true. And that's not appropriate to say to, kind of talk somebody out of doing any kind of additional testing. So that is my TIPspiration for the day. When you are looking at going from a 504 plan to an IEP, to make sure that you're going to agree to the kinds of assessments that they want to conduct. Make sure they review records. There might be previous assessments, so your child won't have to be retested. And then make sure that they do it in the order of, they do the consent for assessment, they actually do the assessments and observations, and then they have the eligibility meeting. And if your child is eligible, then they go into an IEP meeting. So making sure people do things in the right order is very important. So until next time I come up with another TIPspiration, you guys have a great weekend, and we shall talk to you later. Bye-bye.